When 2025 started off with a bang, I had a brainy idea for an episode. The first month of the year is when men ask the profound question.
A man walks down the street, says, why am I soft in the middle now? Why am I soft in the middle? The rest of my life is so hard. I'm full of opportunity. I want to shop for redemption.
I'm Chris, and the mission of this channel is actually quite serious. It's to find the world's most credible scientists and help them tell their stories. So my brainy idea was to talk to scientists in the world's healthiest countries and get them to tell us how they do it. It was timely because a number of countries had just refreshed their dietary guidelines. What was new? Fewer carbs, more protein, and suddenly everything changed.
When I conceived of this episode, I did not see that coming. This has gotten serious.
A man with no background in science or public health was appointed to head America's health services, and he quickly slashed and burned scientific research funding and jobs. I noticed lots of posters about science at this protest, so I talked to the people who made them. This woman is a professor at the University of Oklahoma, and her federal contract for human health was pulled. If I got it right, she's Amy Cohn, professor of pediatrics, whose research was about how to keep youth safe from exposure to addictive substances. Sounds important. RFK's mission is to make America healthy again, and he's got a big job in front of him. Because here's where we are. We're the red line. The horizontal axis is how much we spend per capita on health care, and the vertical axis is how long we live. As you can see, America made real progress from 1970 to 2018 in life expectancy, but we're not in the same league as the other countries on this chart. One of RFK's first priorities was to reject the advice of the scientific committee that suggested new dietary guidelines for America. He promised revised guidelines by the end of the year. Dietary guidelines are wildly controversial in America. Social media personalities widely blame the 1992 food pyramid for contributing to the health crisis in America. But as you can see, it was already underway by then. Even today, Americans make insane claims about it. Here's our new FDA commissioner.
And they're funding research on a new food compass to replace the misinformation they put out with the food pyramid, telling us Lucky Charms is healthier than steak.
Do you see Lucky Charms on the pyramid? Am I missing the added sugar, food colors, and flavorings on this pyramid? Or foods with a long list of ingredients like Lucky Charms? Louise Light led the scientific team that created the 1992 pyramid, and she wrote about how it happened in her book, What to Eat. She wanted fruit and veggies to be at the base of the pyramid, as some country guidelines have today. She wanted grain servings to be lower than the pyramid ended up suggesting, and she wanted to make it clear these were to be whole grains. But the USDA had the final word, and they were concerned about the cost of the food stamp program and school lunches. Scientists have made enormous strides since that 1992 pyramid in understanding fats, proteins, carbs, the microbiome, and the causes of chronic diseases. So let's hear from some of the healthiest countries about what they think of those things, and then we can compare where they're going with where we're going.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much again for making the time. We're really, really excited to ask you about the dietary guidelines.
Thank you for letting me having the opportunity to talk to you and present this work that we are proud of.
My first question is, what types of people make up Norway's Dietary Guideline Committee? And what kinds of research do they use to come up with their guidelines?
Different countries do this in different ways. In Norway, we have a project group within the Norwegian Directorate of Health, which I'm a part of. We are responsible for the Norwegian dietary guidelines, but of course we base our work on science. The scientific work was conducted by a committee which was nominated through the 5 Nordic countries. Last year, we had a report called Nordic Nutrition Recommendations 2023, or short NNR 2023. More than those 400 pages, or many background papers done by around 200 scientists around that, or even more. To add, to make our national dietary guidelines, we have also done a lot of inside work because we wanted a wording that was understandable and also were received as motivational, that you wanted to follow the guidelines.
That's great. And your guidelines, they recommend choosing unsaturated fats over saturated fats. How did they arrive at this guideline?
The NNR is very clear that too much saturated fatty acids increase the risk of cardiovascular diseases. And both controlled clinical trials and large observational studies provide the same findings. We have had these recommendations for 50 years to choose unsaturated fatty acids over saturated fatty acids, and the evidence behind that advice has only grown stronger over the years. And also in 2023, the WHO came with a report and they issued a strong recommendation to limit saturated fatty acids. So it's in line with WHO, with the NNR, and of course also with most other countries' dietary guidelines.
And then if we compare the old plate to the new plate of Norway's guidelines, the new plate, the vegetables and fruits are now half of the plate. And how do you come up to this?
We recommend to eat fruits, berries, or vegetables with every meal. So to manage to do that and to have the volume that we recommend, it actually accounts for about half of the plate, or 5 to 8 portions a day.
And what about dairy? On the current plate, it looks like dairy makes about a third of it. So how did they come up with this amount of dairy? And also, what are the thoughts on plant-based milks?
In Norway, dairy is a very large source of the nutrients calcium and iodine. So it's important in the Norwegian diet to meet the recommendations for those nutrients, to eat 2 to 3 portions a day. And when it comes to the plant-based alternatives, we also say in our dietary guidelines that if you, for any reason, do not eat or drink dairy, you should choose the plant-based alternatives, which are fortified with calcium, iodine, and vitamin B12, and also riboflavin.
And then in the US, at least, there's this whole craze about low-carb diets, and a lot of people don't like carbs that much. And then when we look at Norway's plate, it looks like it's maybe 75% carbs or so. So how is this proportion determined? And also, some people, again, in the US, they think carbs cause diabetes and all these things. How would you respond to that?
Of course, in volume it looks a lot, but in energy percent, it's within the range that we recommend of 45 to 60% of the energy. We are more concerned about the quality of the carbohydrates than the quantity, because we would like the people to eat fruits and vegetables and berries and whole grain products, and not sugar-sweetened beverages and cakes and sweets. It's not like carbohydrate itself causes type 2 diabetes, which I assume that you are talking about. Yeah.
And then in the US, we have a lot of problems with industry influence on our guidelines. What's the case in Norway?
Well, I would say that it's not a big, or it's not an issue. And in our committee, which makes up the scientific foundation, they had very strict criteria for including people in that work, and they could not have any ties to the food industry. And I just wanted to say, because I know that this may be a bit surprising to you, but in Norway, about 7 out of 10 people, they trust the dietary guidelines from the national health authorities. And maybe, I don't know, but maybe that is because we are relatively boring and stable with our guidelines and do not follow every trend that comes along the way.
Boring and stable.
That's a speculation. Maybe, but we follow the scientific advice that we are sure are the best at the time. We are always trying to respond in the media and to provide advices that are based on science, of course, and also to maybe reassure people to listen to their common sense, to not jump on any trend or anything that sounds too good to be true.
What about the spinning top guideline? Will that also be revised in 2025?
No, spinning top is not revised.
So the 2025 guidelines say that the upper limit for protein should be about 20% of the daily energy. How was this recommendation arrived at?
So the upper limit of 20% energy was set in order to prevent metabolic changes such as type 2 diabetes, hypertension, and osteoporosis in adults, as well as unfavorable effects on renal function in the elderly.
What about people who exercise a lot? Should they be eating more protein?
No. If they take more than 20%, it could cause undesirable risks, as I mentioned.
That may come as a shock to protein-obsessed Americans. But the Nordic guidelines also cap protein at 20% of calories and recommend 15%. Eva said they prefer to use percent of energy as opposed to grams of protein per kilograms of body weight. But in their scientific report, they also included grams per kilogram as a reference. They list the average requirement as 0.66, but recommend an intake of 0.83 to cover those who need a little more than the average. But it's far from the levels popular internet influencers in America promote. For young children, they even cap it at 15% max. If you're wondering what the protein content is for the best-selling Orgain protein shakes for children in America, it's only 16% of calories. That's because there's more added sugar than protein powder and a lot more calories from sunflower oil. Calling it a protein shake is a marketing thing. It's more accurate to say sugar oil shake, but that wouldn't sell as well. I guess you have to credit the Orgain marketing team for being able to sell so many sugar oil shakes to parents because they love their children and want the best for them.
Orgain, good, clean nutrition.
Personally, I recommend to people to drink soy milk more than milk.
Okay, and why is that?
Especially people who has high LDL cholesterol, I think they should take soy milk because cow's milk has more saturated fatty acids.
What about the spinning top showing white rice? Is brown rice preferred, or are they kind of equivalent?
I want to recommend brown rice, but the spinning top does not mention brown rice. Unfortunately,
I see.
Many Japanese people prefer white rice. Tastes better.
Yeah.
So there is a lot of people involved in this huge project, but we mainly work with the Swiss Society for Nutrition, a lot of other nutrition experts, but we also work with environmental scientists. That's very important to say that for the first time, data on environmental aspects were used to develop this new nutritional recommendation. And all this project I've been conducting during 4 years. So that was a huge and long project.
And we really put a lot of effort in this new pyramid, not only the perspective, but also we take off everything which was plastic, and we only put like vegetables in fresh, like in a fresh scene. We also try to do a lot of effort in the design itself, because people usually look at the pyramid and not really at the guidelines.
That is true. Most people aren't reading.
Exactly.
Wow. And in these guidelines, I noticed that it said that vegetable oils are recommended over other types of fat. Why is this so?
In general, vegetable oils have a better nutritional profiles as solid oils such as butter, margarine, palm oil, coconut oil. Particularly recommended rapeseed oil in Switzerland because they contain a good balance in fatty acid, especially a good amount of omega-3 fatty acid.
How are the 2024 recommendations updated from the previous guidelines in 2011?
The food pyramid has not changed significantly, but certain food groups are given more emphasis, such as vegetable sources of protein, whole grain, seasonal and regional fruits and vegetables.
I'm trying to connect with a representative from Canada, but I'm getting a lot of static. Seems like he's outside in the snow. Hello? Can you hear me?
Oh, sorry. Christoph from the north here. Have no fear. The Canadian is here.
Hi, Christoph. Seems like you're in the middle of something.
I'm ootin' a boot on a ski day.
Oh, right. Typical. So, Christoph, I'd contacted your friends in Canada, the ones who create their national food guidelines. They knew I was looking for a less corrupt healthcare system. Answers.
Those Canucks on the Dietary Guidelines Committee, they like precise language, so they submitted it in writing. But Christoph from the north may have to spice it up a little.
Yeah, and maybe add some maple syrup too.
They didn't even remember to have a poutine food group. How could they call themselves true Canadians?
I know, right? So, Christoph, what do Canada's food guidelines say about food marketing?
In all seriousness, I look serious, don't I? I am half Canadian and very proud of it. What I love about the Canadian guidelines beside their beautiful plate, they have a section in their guidelines warning people about food marketing. They wrote, Health Canada recognizes that food marketing is a factor that can make following the food guide challenging for many people. Stakeholder comments combined with the evidence led to the inclusion of a statement noting that marketing can influence food choices.
Orgain. It's real nutrition for real life.
So I've interviewed 3 American dietary guideline scientists on this channel, all of them extraordinary, like our national treasure, Marion Nessel. Marion points out that no matter how compelling the science is, in America, an elected official can ignore the evidence our scientists present, which is what RFK Jr. is doing. We got a small dose of that for the 1992 pyramid, and we're getting a shocking dose now. Let's hear from 2 scientists from the 2025 Scientific Advisory Committee.
When I first heard that there's people who think saturated fat and meat are good for you as a student, I remember thinking what science are they reading?
And you served on the Dietary Guidelines Committee.
Yes.
With Didi Tobias, who I interviewed.
Love her.
Yeah, she's great. And a whole panel of experts. I read the report, 450 pages. It's a lot. It looked like the conclusions were eat more beans, peas, and lentils. Eat less meat, poultry, or beef, poultry, and eggs.
Yes.
Avoid added sugars, saturated fat, and sodium. Weren't those the big takeaways?
Those are the big takeaways, and a lot of those are consistent with the past. So we've always said eat less added sugar, eat less sodium, eat more vegetables. Yeah. So a couple interesting things that I was really pleased with from participating in this Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee, which produces an advisory which doesn't become the dietary guidelines. It's advisory material for the USDA and Health and Human Services. So we don't know if that'll actually change the dietary guidelines for Americans.
It may not anymore,
but it is a scientific document backed with 20 scientists who worked for 2 years reviewing the literature.
Wow.
And so let me do the beans, peas, and lentils thing, because this was fun for us. So myself and Deanna Holscher from Texas got charged with the food sources of saturated fat. They've always done saturated fat. And a question came up, well, if you were going to tell somebody to get less saturated fat instead of just saying that, which foods would you say? Because that might have an impact that's more practical than just saying lowering saturated fat. I was very excited about this question, and it started out being, so what are the main sources? And it's meat and dairy and tropical oils. It was pretty consistent that when you switched out some kind of animal food for another source of animal food with less saturated fat, there wasn't much difference.
Really?
You didn't really see an impact going from whole fat milk to skim, from regular beef to lean beef. You saw it when you went from the animal food to the beans, peas, and lentils.
Why?
Or the vegetables, the grains. And to me, the answer is obvious. So not only do those have less saturated fat, they have more fiber.
I know what some of you are thinking. Dude, I need to get shredded, and you don't get there from eating grains and vegetables. And that brings up a fascinating experiment by our own Miguel Ramos. He was asked by his CrossFit gym to teach a class in nutrition. CrossFit is famous for their mostly young, very fit, and health-conscious customers. And CrossFit famously embraces the paleo diet.
So this is a nutrition guide that is in this CrossFit gym and is definitely in a lot of other CrossFit gyms. There's some things here that I see that are really problematic. One of the things that I noticed when people started the class is that they were scared to eat certain foods. And some of these foods they're scared of eating are some of the most healthy foods that you can eat. One example of that is fruits. These are things that say, just eat them occasionally. Well, if they're associated with longevity, we should be eating them more than occasionally, I think. And it's saying that grains are empty calories. Whole grains are not empty calories. And it's saying that they just get stored as body fat.
Miguel teaches the scientific consensus on nutrition, which is often referred to as the Mediterranean diet in the Western world, or as he calls it, a whole food Mediterranean diet. Pretty much what we just saw in the international guidelines. How would that go down in a CrossFit gym? What set his 5-week class apart is he showed up with a big box of stuff.
So as you can tell, this is not normal gym equipment. Some of the things that matter most to our health actually can't be felt or seen. They're only things that we can measure, and that's why I got this. This is what we're going to use to measure both glucose and cholesterol. And then we're going to use this to measure blood pressure.
I mean, my numbers are pretty good, despite us eating the exact same thing.
So you got better numbers than you?
Yeah, which is crazy too, because my childhood...
Is it a difference in blood sugar or cholesterol or both? Or all of the above?
Literally all of the
blood
above.
pressure?
Every single marker.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's crazy.
Do you, in your family, do you have...
High blood pressure, definitely.
3 months after the classes began, they came in for their third round of biometric measurements. Michelle and I went to film it. I admit to being skeptical and humoring Miguel as he threw himself into this. To get dramatic results, it seemed to me you needed to do this on overweight, unfit people with pre-diabetes. But the improvements from the 27-person class were dramatic in both their biometrics and the way they felt. Here's an example biometric and not the most dramatic. 5 people had elevated fasting glucose on day 1 of the class, and all of them normalized by the end. And that's with all the fruit, beans, and whole grains they were now eating. Miguel is busy editing a future Viva Longevity episode about all the details, but here's a preview from young and shredded Kyle.
Yeah, before I cared a lot about macros. It was obviously a big part of it. You know, I was in the fitness space, and so macros is a big part. I would try and get, you know, some sort of protein source, which is usually like a meat, relatively lean meats, but even then still lots of meat, lots of animal products. Now it's been really interesting finding whole foods in every meal, of course, and tons and tons of vegetables and all kinds of different ways to have fun with it. My blood pressure was, I think it was 150 over like 98 or something like that. It's pretty high. I know my blood pressure came down to about 120 over 80, so I think that's exactly what you'd want.
Miguel built a website with more details, which I'll link in the description. So, what are my conclusions from this episode? First, every disaster movie starts with someone ignoring a scientist.
Boy, do I hate being right all the time.
The countries who aren't ignoring scientists have the receipts to show how well listening to scientists actually works. Second, America has created the perfect storm for fomenting internet misinformation. We make supplement salesmen and social media influencers insanely popular and rich by promoting unregulated miracle supplements and fad diets. The agency Norway uses to communicate their guidelines actually calls out keto and paleo diets as fad diets for people without a medical condition like epilepsy. Third, we all have friends who lost their minds over something they fell for on social media, like the seed oil conspiracy.
This is how Canada convinced you to eat engine lubricant.
They needed something to do with some of the byproducts of the oil refining.
The seed oils are driving probably 90% of obesity and chronic disease across the board.
We can reduce our exposure to these life-threatening oils.
They are self-multiplying toxins, and when you buy a bottle of soy oil or canola oil, there's trace amounts of toxins in there, but they multiply and multiply and multiply, and then they attack our cell membranes.
Scientists around the world are completely baffled about how Americans fell for any of that. Fourth, I've rarely heard of anyone who has become as radicalized as RFK Jr. has become from social media. We're seeing children in emergency rooms with vitamin A toxicity worsening their measles infections based on his recommendation to treat measles with vitamin A. Fifth, a major promise of this administration was about the price of groceries. But moving towards more beans, peas, and lentils reduces grocery bills, while moving towards more meat, poultry, and eggs, as the administration wants to do, increases them. And the same exact thing for healthcare costs. And finally, the solution to this is so utterly simple. Just find your favorite country's dietary guidelines and follow them. And just like that, conspiracy theories and misinformation just melt away. We collected 114 dietary guidelines in a spreadsheet and made it public. Each guideline painstakingly researched by scientists, all coming to the same conclusion. In the immortal words of Marion Nestle, the problem with that simple solution is the best dietary advice is boring.